Now I would like to give the floor to Mrs. Yolanda Domenech. Yolanda is member of FEVER's board. She is the psychological support consult and director of PAT, Prevention of Traffic Accidents, and Spanish NGO, which is now more than 50 years old. She will speak about the best practice in post-crash response, the example of the service of information and support for road traffic victims in Catalonia. Yolanda, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anita. I'm going to share the screen so you can see the presentation. First of all, many thanks to the European Federation for Road Traffic Victims for organizing this conference on post-crash response and inviting me to talk about example of good collaboration and share experience of post-crash in Europe. I would like to talk about this experience of collaboration between PAT, the entity that I direct, and the Road Traffic Victim Information Service, which in Catalan is called SIAVT, a service of the government of Catalonia that was created in 2006. I think is a good example of the need for collaboration between NGOs and the government, and how victims of road crash help to make visible the real consequence of road crashes in order to sensitize policymakers. It is a little strange for me to speak to a computer, but I trust there is someone behind the screen. I trust there are other people in the other side. It is important to know, because if not, it does not make sense to talk. It was just a joke to introduce the fact that it makes no sense to talk about accident statistics that go up or down if we don't take into account that behind the numbers, there are people who have seen their lives truncated. Often we reflect and discuss with FIRST members about this issue. And I remember a conversation with Jeannot in Madrid, where we were trying to calculate the figures, the real figures. Because when we talk about road victims, we talk about fatalities and serious injuries, and we also have to add their relative. In Europe, as you know, there are more than 26,000 people killed, and more than 150,000 serious injured. And we all know that this number is underestimated, as not all the countries show their figures. So that makes 176,000 and that we have to multiply, but at least 5 people around which also suffer the consequences. That makes an estimation of at least 880,000 people who are affected by the consequence of road traffic crashes every year in Europe. So you can see that figures of this public health issue are even higher than official data show. And that must make us shout very loud to demand governments to recognize the rights of victims and guarantee a kind of support that responds to their needs. People often have the idea that with the crash, everything ends. But the reality is that in front of a serious road crash, a difficult and long process begins, and that must be accompanied correctly in order not to make the process chronic. Survivors and families affected by road crashes experiences a before and after in their lives and require assistance and follow-up over a period of time during which they must face the task of reconstructing their lives. They can be faced with the loss of a loved one, or maybe the loss of a part, or the loss of the use of a part of the body, the loss of a way of life or the things upon which their well-being depends. As a result, they will have to go through a grieving process, that is to say, the process leading to a gradual readjustment to the changes they live and their gradual acceptance. What is the excuse we always find? Money. Money seems to be always the problem, but we have all the arguments in our favor. Not only because it's an ethical obligation to repair the damage that modern mobility creates in many families, but also because an adequate post-crash response would save money, as it would help to prevent health problems, both physical and mental, and would avoid sick leaves, and therefore health and social costs would be reduced. As you all know, post-crash response is part of the 5 pillars of the decade of action. Here I don't have the updated, as you know, now we are beginning the second decade of action. It is not updated, but you all know what I'm talking about. But we often forget that the preventive part of the pillar 5, in the sense that with an adequate post-crash response, we can help avoid secondary traumatization. This is when a person goes into a depression, suffers from anxiety, or has a post-traumatic stress disorder, all of them possible disorders after a post-crash, they will surely take medication not compatible with driving. And we already know that psychotropic drugs, along with alcohol and other drugs, are present in a high percentage of serious crashes. Furthermore, this type of symptomatology is sorry for my English, that sometimes is difficult to pronounce. Furthermore, this type of symptomatology is susceptible to generate addictions, lack of attention, and lack of concentration, so that a dangerous cocktail for driving. So it is important to take into account and make the necessary efforts to guarantee the quality of life of the victims, and not only as the right of every human being to recover their quality of life after a traumatic event, but also because indirectly we are avoiding risk factors in mobility and of course contributing to reduce long-term health and social expenses. Let's see briefly what is an adequate post-crash integral response. The post-crash response includes health care, and Mr. Paul Schroeder already talked about the medical care. But we also have to take into account the psychological care. I think we have come a long way in medical care, accord priority to improving emergency services and the immediate post-crash response, the famous golden hour, and the adoption of a global emergency telephone number, for example. However, rehabilitation treatments must be ensured to minimize sequelae and help improve quality of life, facilitate access to prostheses or treatments when they are necessary. And as I said, we cannot forget about psychological treatment. There is a lack of an awareness about the need for good psychological care to avoid re-traumatization. Right from the start, with professionals specialized in emergency psychology and professionals specialized in delivering bad news. And of course, with a good follow-up by professionals if necessary. We know that the discharge is not given until the physical wound heals, but many times we don't attend to the emotional wound that we already saw can also create serious problems such as depression, anxiety, insomnia, post-traumatic disorder, and even suicidal ideations, with all the consequences that this entails for the life of the person who is suffering from it. We have also investigation. Agents that make the police report should know that the collection of data and information should be as methodical and meticulous as possible, so there are no doubts about what happened. When the police report suggests some doubt, it will be a recurring theme that will be present in the families past several years. Knowing the truth, to know what exactly happened, is very important to close the grieving process, and also to avoid future crashes. Justice. We need fast justice, and a justice that protects the victim under the umbrella of the statute of crime. All the legal procedure creates added stress and reopens the pain. Often the trial is held after several years. Here in Spain, the average is around 4 years. Having pending the resolution of the judgment, stuck the process being a re-traumatized element. Therefore, it is important quick justice with established protocols and not subject to the judge's interpretation that often bases its decision on overwork without taking into account the seriousness of the facts. And also, the post-crash response should include social inclusion, that is to make feel the affected part of the society again. So I would like to explain the example of collaboration. And I know that Olet Thorson, who was president of PAT during many years, is also attending the conference. So maybe if we have more questions, maybe he also can help me, because he was during all this process. And after a long demand by PAT, but the members of PAT, in 2006 was established the Information and Support Service for Traffic Victims, SIAVT, that offers legal and medical information and psychological assistance to all road victims. I will show you a video that explains the service.
Servei d'atenció a víctimes d'accident de trànsit. Bon dia, la tinc Cristina, que el puc ajudar?
The Road Accident Victims Information Service, or SIAVT, pioneering in Spain, was launched in 2012. This is a service provided by the Catalan Road Service that offers legal guidelines, help with psychological and health issues, and any other assistance to road accident victims or affected parties. SIAVT offers a free helpline available from Monday to Sunday from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. 365 days a year. The assistance provided is set out on the website victimestransit.gencat.cat, where a reply is given within 24 hours and personal face-to-face assistance is also offered.
El gruix més important són dubtes sobre el procediment, dubtes sobre l'atestat, sobre el procediment amb les companyies d'assegurances, orientació jurídica, i també hi ha un altre gruix que seria la demanda psicològica, o a nivell telefònic o a nivell inclús presencial.
This assistance provided through the SIAVT is in addition to the assistance and guidance services offered by victim associations and those offered through public and private means, depending on each case and situation. Ultimately, it is necessary to progress towards an improved response to victims' needs at a time of disorientation and vulnerability, and work hard in this area post-accident, parallel to all the prevention actions and measures to help reach the objectives set out by the Vision Zero campaign.
So let's see some data about the service. For example, people know the service by the police in 64% of the cases, by the health centers, 24 of the cases, or by the website in 12% of the cases. We can see that the legal orientation and psychological support are the most required services together with the police. And Pat has a close relationship with the SIAVT team who, depending on the needs of the person, refer care to the NGOs that work with road victims. Pat believes that this is a pioneering service that can be a good example of best practices for other European countries, as it gives a service of quality. In fact, the degree of satisfaction of the service on a scale of 1 to 9 has the highest score, being 9 points. Even so, we believe that it's important to continue improving the service, and that is why on February 10th, in the context of the Comic to Act campaign run by the Global Alliance, a commitment was agreed to expand the Servei d'Informació i Atenció a les Víctimes de Trànsit, SIAVT, to make it available to victims' family up to 12 months after an incident. Before it was only 3 months. Mourning does not only last 1 year, and that the first year is important in identifying potential future psychological issues. Therefore, we think this commitment will be significant in protecting the mental health of affected people. At this same event, Minister of the Interior and the Director of the Servei Català de Trànsit committed to expand provision of immediate psychological care for all crash victims under the age of 18 who receive serious injuries in a crash. Until now, only those under 12 years of age were eligible. The first moment after a road crash is one of great confusion. People are in a state of shock and can experience anxiety, disorientation, disconnection, and intensive reaction that they do not know how to manage. It is important, therefore, to help the victim to stabilize their emotions and to recover the feeling of control. For young people, a crash can be a big shock with long-term psychological implications. But considers that these measures are one more step to enable those affected by crashes to recover their quality of life, and we are committed to fight for further improvements. To sum up, I would say that collaboration between NGOs and the government is vital and necessary to open their eyes to the true reality, and that NGOs must demand to governments serious post-crash response as a vital component of effective road safety policy, and demand that once a fatal or injury crash has occurred, 2 parallel actions take place at least. Throughout investigation, followed by measures to prevent a recurrence along with criminal and civil proceedings where appropriate, and immediate short-term rescue interventions and long-term rehabilitation and support for those who sustained injuries and their families and caregivers, as well as for the relatives of those killed. And after, if you have any more questions, you can ask me. Just thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Yolanda. Another great example from Catalonia and from our member Pat.